They say the person who laughs last laughs best. But in the case of Richard Sterling, the laughter didn't just stop, it choked him. He thought he was the king of his castle. He thought kicking his wife Sarah to the curb with nothing but a cardboard box was his ultimate victory. He called her pathetic. He called her empty-handed. But Richard made one fatal calculation. He forgot to check who actually owned the ground he was standing on. This is the story of a man who lost a $5 million estate in a single night, all because he didn't read the fine print. And trust me, the ending is sweeter than revenge. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It felt like it was trying to erase the city. On the steps of the sprawling estate at 404 Ashwood Drive, the weather was the least of Sarah Sterling's problems. She stood in the marble foyer, the cold air from the open door biting at her ankles. At 42, Sarah was still beautiful, though the last 3 years had drawn tired violet shadows under her eyes. She wore a simple beige trench coat that had seen better days, her hands gripping the handle of a single, battered rolling suitcase. Tucked under her other arm was a taped-up cardboard box labeled Pantry/Miscellaneous. Standing 10 feet away, leaning against the grand mahogany staircase railing, was Richard Sterling. Richard looked like he had just stepped out of a GQ spread on corporate sharks. He was wearing a navy cashmere sweater, holding a tumbler of amber liquid, probably the 18-year-old Macallan he saved for wins. His smile wasn't warm. It was a serrated blade. "That's it?" Richard asked, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He took a sip, his eyes mocking her. 15 years of marriage, and you're walking out with a carry-on and a box of old recipes. God, Sarah, you really are pathetic. Sarah tightened her grip on the box. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She had done all of that 3 days ago, when she found the texts on his phone messages to a woman named Tiffany, detailing exactly how he was planning to force Sarah out before the pre-nuptial expiration date kicked in next month. "I don't need your money, Richard," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I just want out." Richard threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "You don't need my money, Sarah, look at you. You haven't worked a real job since 2008. You're a middle-aged housewife with no skills, no assets, and thanks to the paperwork you signed yesterday, no alimony. You're leaving my house built with my bonuses to go live in. What a motel." He walked closer, the smell of expensive scotch and arrogant cologne invading her space. He tapped the cardboard box under her arm. What's in there anyway? Stealing the silverware? Just some old paperwork. Recipes. Grandmum's journals, Sarah said quietly. Things you wouldn't care about. You're right, I don't care about junk. He stepped back, gesturing grandly to the door. Go on then. Run along. Tiffany is moving in on Friday, and I want the scent of your desperation aired out by then. Sarah looked at him one last time. She looked at the chandelier she had picked out in Paris. She looked at the oak floors she had personally restored with a contractor when they first bought the place as a fixer-upper, back when Richard was just a hungry junior analyst, and she was the one paying the mortgage with her inheritance. He had forgotten that part. He had rewritten their history so thoroughly that he actually believed he had done it all alone. Goodbye, Rick, she said. She used the nickname he hated, the one from when he was poor. Get out, he sneered, and don't come crawling back when the credit card declines. Sarah turned and walked out into the pouring rain. She loaded the suitcase into the trunk of her 2014 Honda Civic, the car he allowed her to drive because the Mercedes was company property. She placed the cardboard box gently on the passenger seat, strapping it in with the seatbelt as if it were a fragile child. As she reversed out of the long, winding driveway, she saw Richard standing in the illuminated doorway, raising his glass in a mock toast. He looked like a conqueror surveying his kingdom. Inside the car, the silence was heavy. Sarah wiped a single stray tear from her cheek. Then she glanced at the box next to her. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "He thinks it's recipes," she whispered to the empty car. She put the car in drive and headed toward the city. She wasn't going to a motel. She was going to the office of Harrison T. O'Connell, the most expensive, ruthless estate attorney in Washington state. And she wasn't empty-handed. Richard had laughed because he saw a woman leaving with trash. He didn't realize that the trash in that box was the detonator to a bomb that had been ticking for 15 years. For Richard Sterling, the silence that followed Sarah's departure was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of total unencumbered freedom. He closed the heavy oak front door and locked it. Click. Finally, he exhaled. He drained his glass and immediately pulled out his phone. He dialed Tiffany. "Hey, baby," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming smooth and seductive. "She's gone. Yeah, just now. Left like a dung with its tail between its legs. Took nothing but some old junk." He wandered into the living room, collapsing onto the Italian leather sofa. "Friday. No come over tonight. The place is ours. I want to celebrate properly. I'm thinking we rip out that awful carpet in the master bedroom immediately. I want everything fresh." An hour later, Tiffany arrived. She was 24, a fitness instructor, with bright blonde hair and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes, light, airy, and ultimately vacant. She walked into the foyer, shaking off a wet umbrella, her eyes wide, as she took in the sheer scale of the house. "Oh my God, Rick," she squealed, spinning around. "I knew it was big, but this is a palace, and she just left." "She knew she couldn't win," Rick said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I have the best lawyers in the city. The prenup was ironclad. She gets the Honda, I get, well, everything else." "You're so bad," Tiffany giggled, kissing him. "Can we open the good wine, the one you told me about? The 98 Chateau Margaux. For you, absolutely." Richard led her to the kitchen. It was a chef's dream granite countertops, a 6-burner Wolf range, and a custom-built wine cellar. He felt a surge of pride. This was his domain. He had worked 80-hour weeks for this. He deserved the young girlfriend. He deserved the peace. He went to the wine fridge, humming to himself. But as he reached for the bottle, he paused. Something was off. The kitchen felt emptier. Not just clean, but stripped. He looked around. The high-end espresso machine was there. The global knife set was there. But the counter where Sarah used to keep her clutter was bare. "What are you looking for?" Tiffany asked, hopping up onto the counter, her legs dangling. "Nothing," Rick muttered. "Just feels different." "Well, I hope so," she teased. "I'm going to change everything. I want this kitchen painted white. Grey is so depressing." "Whatever you want," Rick said, distracted. He uncorked the wine and poured 2 glasses. They drank, they laughed, and eventually they stumbled upstairs to the master bedroom. The next morning, Richard woke up with a slight headache and a massive sense of self-satisfaction. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tiffany was still asleep, her arm thrown over her eyes. Richard got up and put on his silk robe. He needed to check his safe. He wanted to make sure the victory was official. He wanted to hold the deed to the house just to feel the paper in his hands. He walked into his home office, a dark, wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and ink. He moved the painting of the hunting dogs aside to reveal the wall safe. He spun the dial. Right to 10, left to 24. Right to 05. The heavy steel door clicked open. Richard reached in. He pulled out his passport, stacks of cash he kept for emergencies, and his birth certificate. He shuffled through the file folders. Insurance. Tax returns. 20 to 2024. Investments. He frowned. He dug deeper, his hand scraping the cold metal back of the safe. "Where is it?" he muttered. He pulled everything out, dumping the contents onto his mahogany desk. Passports, stock certificates, the prenup Sarah had signed yesterday. But the property deed. The thick cream-colored document with the official red seal of King County was gone. Richard felt a cold prickle of sweat on his neck. He frantically opened the insurance folder, thinking he might have misfiled it. Nothing. He checked the investments folder. Nothing. "That bitch," he whispered. His mind flashed back to the night before. Sarah, standing in the rain. The taped-up cardboard box under her arm. Just some old paperwork. Recipes. Grandmum's journals. "No," Richard said aloud, his voice rising. "She wouldn't dare. It doesn't matter if she has the paper. The house is in my name. Stealing the physical document doesn't change ownership. It's digital. It's recorded." He tried to calm himself down. He was a smart man. He knew how the law worked. Possession of the paper deed was largely symbolic in the modern age. If she took it, it was just a petty act of vandalism. A parting shot to annoy him. He chuckled, though it sounded nervous in the empty office. "Nice try, Sarah. You steal a piece of paper, I'll just file for a lost deed replacement on Monday. Pathetic." He shoved the papers back into the safe and slammed it shut. He was about to head back to the bedroom when his phone buzzed on the desk. It was a courier notification. Priority delivery. Incoming 9:00 a.m. He frowned. It was Saturday. He checked the time, 8:55 a.m. A moment later the doorbell rang. Richard tightened his robe and went downstairs. Through the frosted glass he saw the silhouette of a delivery man. He opened the door. "Richard Sterling?" the courier asked. He wasn't a regular mailman, he was wearing a suit. "Yes." "You have been served." The man handed him a thick manila envelope, nodded once and walked away without another word. Richard stood there, the cold morning air hitting his bare legs. He looked at the return address on the envelope. Law offices of O'Connell, Way and Associates. Richard's stomach dropped. Harrison O'Connell wasn't a divorce lawyer. He was a corporate shark who handled land disputes and high-stakes trust litigation. He cost $1,000 an hour just to breathe in his direction. "What is this?" Tiffany's voice floated down from the top of the stairs. She was wrapped in a sheet, looking sleepy and tousled. "Is that a present?" Richard didn't answer. He tore open the tab on the envelope. He pulled out a stack of documents. The cover page was bold and terrifying. Notice to vacate and cease and desist. Plaintiff. The Beatrice Sterling Irrevocable Trust Trustee. Sarah J. Sterling. Richard's eyes scanned the page, his breath becoming shallow. He read the first paragraph, and his knees nearly gave out. "Dear Mr. Sterling, please be advised that your lease on the property, located at 404 Ashwood Drive, expired at midnight on February 3rd, concurrent with the dissolution of your marital union. As per the terms of the 1998 land grant deed, established by your late grandmother, Beatrice Sterling, ownership of the physical structure resides with you, but the land upon which the structure sits remains the sole property of the trust. Richard blinked. He read it again. Furthermore, the trust stipulates that upon any act of infidelity or filing of divorce initiated by the male beneficiary, the ground lease is immediately terminated and the landowner. The trust reserves the right to remove any unauthorized structures or charge a market-rate penalty rent. Richard's hands shook. He remembered now. 20 years ago. His grandmother, Beatrice. She hated him. She had always said he was just like his father, a cheater and a liar. When she died, she left him the house, or so he thought. He had been so young, so arrogant, he just signed whatever the lawyers put in front of him. He looked at the bottom of the page. Penalty rent assessment. $55,000 per month, retroactive to the date of first breach of contract. January 14th, 2024. Total due immediately, $110,000. Eviction proceedings to commence in 72 hours. Rick. Tiffany came down the stairs looking concerned. You look pale. What is it? Richard looked up at her, his face a mask of horror. The junk Sarah had taken. It wasn't recipes. It was the trust documents, the proof that he owned the bricks. But she, through his dead grandmother's spite, owned the dirt. She didn't just leave. Richard whispered, his voice cracking. She just foreclosed on me. While Richard was hyperventilating in his foyer, Sarah sat in a leather chair that cost more than her Honda Civic. She was on the 42nd floor of the Columbia Center, staring out at the gray skyline of Seattle. Across the desk sat Harrison O'Connell. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair, a suit that fit like armor, and eyes that had seen every form of human greed imaginable. You look surprising calm, Mrs. Sterling, Harrison said, tenting his fingers, considering you just declared war. Sarah took a sip of the sparkling water his assistant had brought. I'm not calm, Mr. O'Connell. I'm numb. There's a difference. Harrison smiled thinly. He opened the file in front of him, the same file Sarah had extracted from the pantry/miscellaneous box. Your late grandmother-in-law, Beatrice Sterling, was a fascinating woman, Harrison mused. I remember drafting this trust for her back in '98. She was particular. She was vicious, Sarah corrected gently. But she loved me. She told me once, Sarah men in this family are built like peacocks, pretty to look at, but they scream when they don't get their way. Always keep a pair of shears handy. Harrison chuckled. And these are quite the shears. Let's review the mechanism so you understand exactly what button you just pushed. He tapped the document. Richard owns the house. The wood, the glass, the copper wiring. It is his asset. However, Beatrice put the land, the actual 1.5 acres of prime waterfront real estate, into the Sterling Matriarchal Trust. She leased the land to Richard for 99 years for the sum of $1 a year. Harrison leaned forward. With conditions. The moral clause, Sarah said. Precisely. Beatrice was a devout woman who hated divorce. The clause states that if the leaseholder, Richard, dissolves his marriage to the primary beneficiary's named spouse, that's you, due to his own infidelity, or files for divorce to pursue another union, the $1 lease is void. And it reverts to market rate, Sarah finished. Commercial market rate, Harrison corrected, plus penalties. We've had an appraiser look at the land value. Given the zip code, the waterfront access, and the penalty multipliers, Beatrice included, Richard owes the trust $55,000 a month. And since the trust documents name you As the sole trustee, in the event of a divorce, you are effectively his landlord. Sarah looked down at her hands. She remembered the nights Richard had spent late at the office. She remembered the smell of Tiffany's perfume on his shirts, a sickly sweet vanilla scent he claimed was air freshener from the Uber. She remembered how he made her feel small, stupid, and dependent. "He thinks I'm helpless," Sarah whispered. "He told me yesterday, I have no skills." "You have the most important skill of all, Sarah," Harrison said, closing the folder. "Patience. Now Richard is going to call his lawyer. That lawyer is going to call me. They will threaten to sue. They will claim the trust is invalid. They will try to bury you in paperwork." "Can they win?" "No," Harrison said flatly. Beatrice hated Richard's father for losing the family fortune. She made this trust ironclad to ensure the property could never be sold or leveraged without spousal consent. Richard never read it because he was 22 and thought he knew everything. He signed the acknowledgement of the trust when he inherited the house. Harrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smirked. "Speak of the devil, it's Stan Miller, Richard's attorney." Harrison hit the speaker button. "Harrison!" Stan's voice barked through the phone, sounding breathless and frantic. "What the hell is this notice my client just received? You can't be serious. Eviction retroactive rent. This is extortion." "Hello to you too, Stan," Harrison said smoothly. "It's not extortion. It's contract law. Did you read Clause 4, Section B of the 1998 deed? Clause 4 is archaic." "It's unconscionable," Stan shouted. "You can't separate the house from the land like that. It's a fixture. Actually, in Washington state, ground leases are perfectly common in commercial real estate." Beatrice structured the estate as a commercial entity managed by the trust. Richard is essentially a tenant running a business, the business of being a husband. He failed his performance review. There was a silence on the other end, followed by the sound of shuffling papers. "Harrison, look." Stan's voice dropped, becoming wheedling. "Rich is freaking out. He's got guests. Can we settle this? He's willing to offer Sarah a lump sum, 50 grand, just to make this go away." Sarah felt a surge of anger. 50 grand that wouldn't even cover the legal fees she was about to incur. It was an insult. Harrison looked at Sarah. She shook her head. "We aren't interested in a settlement, Stan," Harrison said. "We want the rent, or we want the land back. If Richard doesn't pay the $110,000 by Tuesday, we will file a lien against the structure. And Stan, tell your client to be careful. If he damages the property while throwing his temper tantrums, the trust allows us to sue for triple damages." Harrison hung up. "He's scared," Harrison said. Sarah stood up, smoothing her coat. "He should be. He just lost his kingdom." Back at 404 Ashwood Drive, the mood had shifted from honeymoon to hostage situation in record time. Richard was pacing the living room, his phone glued to his ear. Tiffany was sitting on the sofa scrolling through Instagram, looking increasingly bored. "What do you mean it's complicated, Stan?" Richard screamed into the phone. "I pay you $400 an hour to make things simple. It's my house. My name is on the mortgage." "That's the problem, Rick." Stan's voice crackled. "You have the mortgage on the house, but you don't own the ground. It's like owning a mobile home in a trailer park. But the trailer park is a $5 million estate, and the park manager is your ex-wife." "So fix it, sue her." "We can sue," Stan admitted. "But that takes months, years. And in the meantime, the trust has a legal right to demand rent. If you don't pay, they can put a lien on the house. That means your assets freeze. If you try to sell the house, the trust gets paid first. If you try to refinance..." finance the bank, seize the lien, and denies you. Richard stopped pacing. His blood ran cold. Refinance. He hadn't told anyone this, not Sarah, certainly not Tiffany. But Richard was cash poor. He was Seattle rich, which meant he had millions in assets, but very little liquid cash. His lifestyle consumed his paycheck before it even hit the bank. The lease on the Mercedes, the country club dues, the trips to Cabo with Tiffany. It all added up. He had been planning to refinance the house next month, to pull out $200,000 in equity to pay off some gambling debts and cover the divorce costs. "Stan," Richard said, his voice trembling, "I can't get a lien. I need to tap the equity." "You can't tap anything until you settle with the trust," Stan said. "My advice, pay the rent or apologize." Richard threw the phone across the room. It bounced off the sofa cushion and landed next to Tiffany. "Everything okay, babe?" Tiffany asked, not looking up from her screen. "You're ruining the vibe." "The vibe?" Richard snapped. He looked at her, really looked at her. Yesterday she had looked like a prize. Today, in the harsh light of his financial collapse, she looked expensive. Her hair extensions probably cost more than his car insurance. Her nails were fresh acrylics. "Yes, the vibe," Tiffany said, finally looking up. "You promised we'd go shopping for furniture today. I found this amazing white sectional at Restoration Hardware. It's only $12,000. Richard let out a dark, manic laugh. $12,000, right. About that. He walked over to the wet bar and poured himself a drink. It was 11 a.m. "Tiffany, sweetie," he said, taking a gulp of scotch. "We might need to hold off on the furniture. There's a clerical error with the house title. My ex-wife is trying to cause trouble." Tiffany's face fell. "So no shopping?" "Not today." "But you promised," she whined, standing up. She was wearing one of his dress shirts, open at the collar. "You said when she left we'd have carte blanche. You said you were the king." "I am the king," Richard roared, slamming his glass down so hard it cracked. "But the king is dealing with a peasant revolt. Can you just give me a minute?" Tiffany recoiled, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't used to being yelled at. She was used to being spoiled. "Whoa," she said, holding up her hands. "Don't take it out on me. It's not my fault you didn't handle your business. Maybe you should call her." "Call her? Yeah, beg," Tiffany said, picking up her purse. "I'm going to go get a latte. The energy in here is toxic right now." She walked out. She didn't offer to bring him anything. Richard stood alone in the silence of his massive, mortgaged, rented house. He realized with a sinking feeling that he didn't know how to use the coffee machine. Sarah always made the coffee. He needed to fix this. He couldn't pay $55,000 a month. He barely had $20,000 in his checking account. He grabbed his car keys. He knew where Sarah would go. She was predictable. She would be at her sister's place in West Seattle, crying into a pillow. He would go there, charm her, maybe threaten her a little, and get her to sign a waiver. He marched out to the driveway. He got into his Mercedes S-Class. He pushed the start button. Nothing happened. He pushed it again. Click, click, click. The dashboard lit up with a warning, "Anti-theft system engaged. Contact dealer." What? Richard slammed the steering wheel. Then he remembered. The car was leased through his company. His company, Sterling Analytics. And who was the 49% shareholder and CFO of Sterling Analytics until yesterday? Sarah. He pulled out his phone and checked his email. There, buried in his spam folder, was a notification from the Fleet Management Service. Subject asset freeze / reported stolen. Authorized by S. Sterling, CFO. Richard stared at the phone. She had reported the car as a disputed asset because the divorce wasn't finalized. Finalized, and she was still an officer of the company. She had flagged the vehicle as being at high risk of misappropriation. He was trapped in his own driveway, in the rain. He looked at the Honda Civic Spot, which was empty. For the first time in 15 years, Richard Sterling felt a specific emotion he hadn't felt since he was a child. Helplessness. He had to take an Uber to find his wife. The Uber driver was driving a Toyota Corolla that smelled like pine trees and old cigarettes. Richard sat in the back, seething. He had tracked Sarah not to her sister's house, but to a small, nondescript apartment complex in the University District. Stan had found the address through a credit check on the new utility hookups. Richard got out, smoothing his wet suit jacket. The building was brick sturdy, but old. No doorman, no valet. He buzzed apartment 3B. No answer. He buzzed again. Long, aggressive presses. Finally, the intercom crackled. "Who is it?" It wasn't Sarah. It was a man's voice. Deep. Protective. Richard bristled. "This is Richard Sterling. I'm here to see my wife. Let me in." "Sarah is busy," the voice said. "Who the hell is this?" Richard demanded. "This is Mike, the guy who's helping her move the heavy stuff. Something you probably never did." The door buzzed open. Richard pushed through, his face red. He stomped up the 3 flights of stairs. The door to 3B was open. Sarah was standing in the middle of a small living room. It was tiny compared to Ashwood Drive, but it was warm. There were books on the shelves already. A rug he didn't recognize. And standing next to her was Mike Sarah's younger brother, a contractor, who had hated Richard since the wedding day. "What do you want, Richard?" Sarah asked. She wasn't crying. She was holding a mug of tea, wearing oversized wool socks and leggings. She looked comfortable. "We need to talk," Richard panted out of breath from the stairs. "In private." Mike crossed his arms. He was 6'2" and built like a brick wall. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of me." Richard ignored him and focused on Sarah. "You need to stop this, Sarah. The letter, the car. It's childish. You're acting like a scorned teenager." "I'm acting like a trustee," Sarah said calmly. "And a CFO." "You're ruining me," Richard shouted, his composure cracking. "Tiffany is upset. I can't access my equity. I can't drive my car. You're trying to destroy my life." Sarah took a slow sip of her tea. She set the mug down on a coaster. "Richard," she said softly, "you destroyed your life. You destroyed it the minute you touched that woman. You destroyed it when you drained our joint savings account to buy her jewelry. I saw the statements, Richard. Cartier, really." Richard blanched. I'm not ruining you." Sarah continued, stepping closer. "I'm just holding you to the contract you signed. You wanted to be the man of the house. Fine. Pay the rent." "I don't have the money." Richard confessed, the words tearing out of his throat. "I don't have $55,000 a month." "You know that. I do know that." Sarah nodded. "Which means you have 2 options." Richard looked at her with desperate hope. "What, I'll do anything. I'll give you a better settlement. I'll give you the Mercedes." "I don't want the Mercedes," Sarah said. "Option 1, you pay the rent. Option 2, you vacate the property immediately. You hand over the keys, you move out, and you sign the house over to the trust in lieu of the debt." "Give you the house," Richard gasped. "That house is worth $5 million. It's my legacy." "It's your prison," Sarah said. "And the rent is due on the 1st. You have 48 hours, Richard. If the money isn't in the trust account by Tuesday morning, Harrison is filing the eviction notice, and the sheriff's in King County. They aren't as polite as I am. She walked to the door and held it open. Get out of my apartment, Richard. You're tracking mud on my rug. Richard looked at Mike, who cracked his knuckles. He looked at Sarah, whose eyes were as cold as the Puget Sound. He turned and walked out. As he walked down the stairs, he heard the door click shut and the deadbolt slide home. He was outside in the rain again. He checked his phone to call an Uber. Battery dead. Richard Sterling, the king of Ashwood Drive, began the long, wet walk home. But the worst part wasn't the rain. The worst part was the text message he had seen on Tiffany's phone just before he left the house. It was a DM from a guy named Brad Jim. It read, "You said he was rich. Why is his card getting declined for the pizza?" Richard walked into the grey drizzle, knowing that when he got home the house might still be standing. But his life was already rubble. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Richard Sterling had not slept. He had spent the last 48 hours drinking the remaining inventory of his wine cellar and leaving voicemail messages for Stan Miller, who had officially fired him as a client via email on Sunday night. Richard was desperate. He had found a new lawyer, a man named Barry Higgins, whose office was located above a Thai takeout restaurant in Bellevue. Barry's billboard slogan was, "When they bite, we bite back." He cost a fraction of what Stan charged, mostly because he accepted post-dated checks and desperation as currency. They stood outside the King County Superior Court. The rain had stopped, replaced by a grey, oppressive humidity. "All right, here's the play," Barry said, adjusting a tie that was 2 inches too wide for the current fashion. "We go in there and claim unconscionable contract. We say you were young under duress and that the grandmother's trust violates public policy against punitive damages in marital disputes. We throw enough mud, maybe the judge grants an emergency stay on the eviction. Just get me back in my house," Richard muttered, his eyes bloodshot behind dark sunglasses. "And get that rent order quashed." "We'll try," Barry said, not sounding entirely convinced. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was sterile and cold. Sarah was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table. She looked impeccable. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Next to her sat Harrison O'Connell, looking like a silver-haired shark who smelled blood in the water. Richard slumped into his seat. He looked around for Tiffany. She had promised to come for moral support. She wasn't there. "All rise," the bailiff droned. "The Honorable Judge Martha Reynolds presiding." Judge Reynolds was a woman in her 60s, with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a reputation for having zero tolerance for theatrics. She sat down, opened the file, and raised an eyebrow. "Case 40,992, the Beatrice Sterling Irrevocable Trust versus Richard Sterling, motion for emergency stay of eviction and dispute of rent assessment. Mr. Higgins, you may proceed." Barry Higgins stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, my client is being victimized by an archaic and vindictive legal loophole. The document in question, this ground lease, was signed over 20 years ago. To enforce a penalty of $55,000 a month simply because a marriage ended is not only absurd, it is extortion. We ask the court to void the lease terms and treat the property as a standard marital asset to be divided equitably." Barry sat down, looking pleased with himself. Judge Reynolds turned her gaze to the other table. "Mr. O'Connell." Harrison didn't even stand up immediately. He slowly arranged his papers. Then he rose. "Your Honor, Mr. Higgins forgets that this is not a divorce hearing. This is a contract dispute between a landlord, the trust, and a tenant, Mr. Sterling. The terms of the lease were clear. The land was provided for $1 per year, a subsidy of effectively $600,000 annually, provided the tenant adhered to the moral code of the grantor. The tenant did not. Harrison picked up a remote control. The trust stipulates that the lease reverts to market rate upon proven infidelity. We are not asking for a division of assets. We are asking for the rent owed. And as for the extortion claim, the trust provided a cure period. Mr. Sterling could have avoided the penalty by not cheating on his wife. "Objection!" Barry shouted. "Alleged cheating." Harrison smiled. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A, a series of text messages and geolocation data from Mr. Sterling's phone provided by Mrs. Sterling, who was the account administrator for the family plan. The large monitor in the courtroom flickered to life. It didn't show grainy photos. It showed a spreadsheet, dates, times, hotel charges, and explicit texts to Tiffany, Jim, dating back 6 months. The courtroom was silent. Richard sank lower in his chair. He felt the eyes of the stenographer on him. "The breach of contract is irrefutable," Harrison continued. "The rent is valid. The eviction notice is valid. And frankly, Your Honor, Mr. Sterling is currently squatting on trust land." Judge Reynolds took off her glasses. She looked at Richard with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Mr. Higgins," the judge said, "the law regarding land trusts is quite specific in Washington. The structure may belong to your client, but he has no right to keep it on land. He no longer has a lease for, unless your client can pay the assessed rent." "He cannot at this time." "Your Honor," Barry stammered, "then the trust's motion is granted." The judge slammed her gavel. "Mr. Sterling has 24 hours to vacate the premises or pay the outstanding balance of $110,000. Failure to do so will result in a sheriff's writ of restitution. Next case." It was over in 10 minutes. Richard stumbled out of the courtroom, his ears ringing. He pulled out his phone to call Tiffany. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He frowned. He opened Instagram. He searched for her profile. User not found. She had blocked him. He frantically called his neighbor Bob, who lived across the street on Ashwood Drive. "Bob, hey, it's Rick. Listen, I'm stuck downtown. Is there anyone at my house?" There was a long pause. Rick, yeah. There was a moving truck here about an hour ago." "A moving truck? Did Sarah send it?" "I don't think so," Bob said awkwardly. "It was that blonde girl." "Tiffany. She and a couple of guys loaded up the electronics, the artwork, and I think I saw your golf clubs. She told me you guys were downsizing, and she was taking stuff to storage for you." Richard dropped the phone. It hit the courthouse steps with a crack. She hadn't just left him. She had looted him. Tuesday, 10 a.m. The deadline. The rain had returned heavy and relentless. 404 Ashwood Drive stood grey and imposing against the storm. Richard Sterling sat on a folding chair in the middle of the living room. It was the only piece of furniture left. Tiffany had been thorough. She had taken the TVS. She had taken the sofas. She had even taken the espresso machine. All that remained was Richard, a bottle of lukewarm tap water, and the ghosts of his life. He wore the same suit from court. It was wrinkled now. He hadn't shaved. He looked 20 years older than he had 3 days ago. He heard the heavy tires on the gravel driveway. Blue and red lights flashed against the living room walls, reflecting off the bare spots where paintings used to hang. The doorbell didn't ring. Instead, there was a heavy pounding. Sheriff's Department, open up." Richard didn't move. He stared at the empty fireplace. He thought about the day he and Sarah moved in. She had carried a box of books. He had carried a case of champagne. She had looked at him with so much hope. "We're going to build a dynasty here, Rick," she had said. He had built a dynasty, all right. A dynasty of lies. And now the castle was falling. The door handle rattled, then the sound of a master key turning. Sarah had provided the trust's key to the deputies. The door swung open. 2 King County Sheriff's deputies stepped in, rain dripping from their brims. Behind them stood Harrison O'Connell and a third man, a locksmith. "Mr. Sterling?" the lead deputy asked, his hand resting near his belt. "It's time." Richard looked up. "It's my house," he rasped. "I paid for the bricks." "We understand, sir," the deputy said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But you don't have a right to be on the property. You can arrange to have the structure moved or you can abandon it. But you personally have to leave the land. Now." Richard stood up. His legs felt shaky. "Where is she?" "Mrs. Sterling is in the car," Harrison said, stepping forward. He held a clipboard. "She prefers not to engage with you directly. I am here to facilitate the handover." "The handover?" Richard laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "There's nothing left to hand over, Harrison. Tiffany took it all. The furniture, the '98 Margot, all of it. That is a matter for the police if you wish to file a report," Harrison said coldly. "Right now, I need your keys and the garage opener." Richard reached into his pocket. He pulled out the heavy brass keyring. The keychain had the Porsche logo on it, for a car he no longer had. He dropped them into Harrison's outstretched palm. "This isn't fair," Richard whispered. "Fairness is a concept for children, Richard," Harrison said. "Contracts are for adults. You broke the contract." The deputies escorted him out. They didn't drag him, but they walked close enough to catch him if he ran. He walked out the front door down the marble steps he used to sweep so proudly and onto the wet driveway. A black Range Rover was parked at the end of the drive. The window was rolled up. The glass was tinted. He couldn't see in, but he knew she was there. "Sarah!" Richard yelled, stopping in the rain. "Sarah, please talk to me." The window didn't move. The car didn't idle. It just sat there, a silent monolith of judgment. The deputy nudged him. "Keep moving, sir. You need to be off the property line. That means the street." They walked him to the curb, the public sidewalk, the line where the Sterling Matriarchal Trust ended and the city of Seattle began. "You are now trespassed from this address," the deputy said. "If you return, you will be arrested. Do you understand?" "Yes," Richard said, staring at his shoes. The deputies got back in their cruiser. Harrison O'Connell went inside the house with the locksmith. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked. Richard stood alone on the sidewalk. He was wet. He was broke. He was homeless. Then the Range Rover door opened. Richard's heart leaped. "She's coming back," he thought. "She's going to yell at me, maybe, but she's acknowledging me." Sarah stepped out. She held a large black umbrella. She walked toward him, stopping 5 feet away just inside the property line. She looked vibrant, healthy, and incredibly distant. "Sarah," Richard choked out. "I'm sorry. About everything." Sarah looked at him, tilting her head slightly. "I know you are, Rick. I know you're sorry you got caught. I know you're sorry you lost the money. Know about us? I loved you." "You loved the way I looked on your arm," Sarah corrected. "And you loved my grandmother's house, but you never respected either of us." She reached into her purse. Richard braced himself. Was she going to give him money? A check, a hotel key. She pulled out a small white envelope. "What is this?" he asked. "Harrison told me Tiffany cleaned out the house," Sarah said. "I figured you wouldn't have anywhere to go." Richard took the envelope. His hands were shaking. He opened it. Inside was a single business card and a brochure. New Beginnings, Shelter for Men. 1402 Pine Street, Seattle. "Sarah," Richard stared at the brochure in horror. "They have beds open." Sarah said, her voice devoid of malice, which made it worse. "I called ahead. I told them you were coming. They can help you with job placement, Rick. Maybe you can find something entry-level." "You can't leave me like this," he pleaded. "I was a CEO." "You were a figurehead," she said. "And now you're a fresh start. Good luck, Richard." She turned around. "Wait," he yelled. "What are you going to do with the house? You can't live there alone. It's too big." Sarah stopped. She turned her head, offering him one last profile view. "Oh, I'm not living there," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I already signed a deal this morning. I'm donating the land to the city." Richard's jaw dropped. "What?" "They're going to demolish the house," Sarah said comfortably. "They're turning the property into a public park, the Beatrice Sterling Memorial Park." "Demolish my house?" Richard looked at the mansion. "You're going to bulldoze it. Beatrice always said the view belonged to everyone," Sarah said. "And besides, I couldn't live there. The place has a termite infestation." "Termites?" Richard frowned. "No, it doesn't." Sarah's smile widened, sharp and dangerous. "It does now. Or at least, the type of pest I just removed was far more destructive than any bug. Goodbye, Rick." She got back into the Range Rover. The engine purred. She drove up the long driveway, past the house that would soon be rubble, leaving Richard standing on the curb. He watched until the taillights disappeared. Then slowly he looked down at the brochure in his hand. New Beginnings. He laughed. It was a broken, wheezing sound. He started walking down the street, the rain soaking through his expensive, ruined suit. 6 months later. The destruction of 404 Ashwood Drive did not happen with a whisper. It happened with a roar that shook the entire neighborhood. On a crisp Tuesday morning in September, a massive yellow excavator sat on the perfectly manicured lawn like a prehistoric beast. The neighbors, the quiet doctor to the left and the retired federal judge to the right, stood on their porches with cups of coffee watching. They weren't horrified. In fact, Mrs. Higgins, the judge's wife, looked almost gleeful. She had hated Richard's late-night parties and the way he revved his engine at 2 a.m. Sarah sat in her Range Rover across the street, the window down. Beside her sat Harrison O'Connell. "Are you sure you want to watch this?" Harrison asked. "It can be traumatic to see a home destroyed." "It's not a home, Harrison," Sarah said, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses. "It's a structure. The home left a long time ago." She signaled the foreman. The hydraulic arm of the excavator lifted the metal claw gleaming in the sun. It swung forward, crashing through the roof of the master bedroom. There was a sickening crunch of timber glass and drywall. The balcony where Richard had smoked his cigars crumbled into dust. The window where Tiffany had looked out and laughed at Sarah shattered into 1,000 diamonds before falling into the mud. Sarah didn't flinch. She felt a weight lifting off her chest lighter with every piece of the facade that fell. The demolition took 2 days. By Friday, the Sterling estate was nothing but a flat expanse of dirt, opening up a breathtaking, unobstructed view of Lake Washington that had been hidden behind the house's massive bulk for 20 years. Sarah got out of the car and walked onto the dirt. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, the way it had smelled when Beatrice first bought the land in the 1950s. "It breathes now," Sarah whispered. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather-bound book. It was one of the journals from the cardboard box, the junk Richard had mocked. She opened it to a page marked with a blue ribbon. Entry: June 14th, 1999. Rick brought the new girl Sarah to tea today. She is quiet, but she notices things. She noticed the hydrangeas were thirsty. Rick only noticed himself in the mirror. I worry for her, but she has a spine of steel buried deep. If he ever breaks her heart, I have left her the hammer. I hope she never has to use it, but if she does, I hope she swings it hard. Sarah closed the book and looked out at the water. "I swung it, Beatrice," she said softly. "I swung it hard." The used car lot. 10 miles away in a strip mall off Highway 99, Richard Sterling adjusted his tie. It was a polyester blend purchased from a discount rack. His silk ties were long gone, sold to a consignment shop to pay for the deposit on his studio apartment. "Sterling." "You got a customer on the lot?" his manager shouted. The manager was a 20-something kid named Kyle, who chewed gum with his mouth open and clearly enjoyed bossing around a man twice his age. "I'm on it, Kyle," Richard muttered. He walked out into the drizzle. He was working at Best Choice Auto Sales, a purgatory of high-mileage sedans and desperate buyers. It was a far cry from the corner office at Sterling Analytics. After the eviction, Richard's life had unraveled with terrifying speed. The lien on the house debacle had hit the local business journals. His reputation as a financial genius plummeted when it was revealed he had lost his primary asset due to a gross misunderstanding of contract law. His clients fled. The board of his company, emboldened by Sarah's detailed financial reports of his embezzlement of company perks, voted to oust him. He had declared bankruptcy 3 months ago. Tiffany was gone. The last he heard, she was in Miami dating a cryptocurrency influencer, who was probably lying to her too. Richard approached the customer, a young couple, looking at a 2016 Honda Civic. "Good afternoon," Richard said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Looking for something reliable?" "Yeah, we need something gas-efficient," the husband said. "We're saving up for a house." Richard felt a phantom pain in his chest. "A house? Good goal. Just make sure you read the deed. Every line." The couple looked at him strangely. "Can we test drive it?" the wife asked. "Sure. Let me get the keys." As Richard walked back to the office, he passed the break room TV. It was tuned to the local news. The chyron at the bottom of the screen caught his eye. Breaking grand opening of Beatrice Sterling Park on Ashwood Drive. Land donated by local philanthropist Sarah Sterling. Richard stopped. He couldn't breathe. On the screen, a reporter was standing on his land. But the house was gone. In its place were winding walking paths, benches, and a beautiful gazebo right near the water. Children were running where his wine cellar used to be. A couple was having a picnic on the spot where his Mercedes used to be parked. And there was Sarah. She was cutting a ribbon. She looked radiant. She was wearing a cream-colored coat, her hair loose and waving in the wind. She was laughing a genuine, full-throated laugh that he realized with a jolt he hadn't heard in a decade. "Ms. Sterling?" the reporter asked, shoving a microphone in her face. "This land is valued at over $6 million. Why turn it into a park?" Sarah looked directly into the camera. For a second, Richard felt like she was looking right at him through the grainy television screen in the break room of a used car lot. "Because," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong, "some things are too beautiful to be hoarded, and some foundations are too rotten to fix. I wanted to give this land back to the things that matter. Fresh air, truth, and freedom. And what about your ex-husband? Does he have a comment? The reporter asked, digging for dirt. Sarah didn't take the bait. She smiled, but it was a smile of pity, not malice. I wish him well, she said. I hope he finds his own patch of ground someday. But this one belongs to everyone now. Richard stared at the screen. The camera panned out to show a bronze plaque mounted on a large stone at the entrance of the park. Beatrice Sterling, Memorial Park. Land is borrowed, integrity is owned, gifted by Sarah J. Sterling. Sterling keys, Kyle yelled from the office. Richard snapped out of his trance. He looked around the dingy break room smelling of stale coffee and floor cleaner. He looked at his cheap shoes. He looked at the rain falling outside on the rows of rusting cars. He realized then that he hadn't just lost the house. He hadn't just lost the money. He had lost the narrative. He was no longer the protagonist of his own life. He was just a footnote in Sarah's success story. He grabbed the keys to the Honda Civic. Coming, Richard said. He walked out into the rain, the laughter of his ex-wife still echoing in his mind. He finally understood the punchline. Sarah hadn't left empty-handed. She had taken the only thing that mattered, her dignity, and in exchange she had left him with exactly what he deserved. Nothing. Wow. Talk about a reality check. Richard spent 15 years thinking he was the king of the castle, only to find out he was just a guest in his own life. It's a brutal lesson, but a necessary one. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never sign a contract you haven't read, especially if your grandmother-in-law had a spine of steel. Sarah didn't just get revenge. She got liberation. She turned a monument of ego into a place of peace for the whole community. It's the ultimate power move, not destroying your enemy, but outgrowing them completely. If you were in Sarah's shoes, would you have donated the land to the city? Or would you have kept it and built your own dream house right on top of Richard's memory? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket in a place you will never guess. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, read the fine print.